Now, the first phase of cellular respiration is called glycolysis. Glycolysis literally means breakdown. Lysis is splitting, and glycose is sugar. So the word literally means that it's the splitting of the glucose molecule. Um, literally, what is glycolysis? Glycolysis means splitting of glucose. Glucose is a 6-carbon compound, which means it's a compound that has 6 carbons in them. And glucose is breaking down in the cytoplasm, which is outside the mitochondria for eukaryotic cell. And it is broken down into in a series of steps. So it's not just a one-step reaction; it's a series of steps, and the end product is a molecule that is called as pyruvate. Pyruvate is a 3-carbon compound. So you can see if you have one 6-carbon compound, then splitting that would give you 2 3-carbon compounds, which is the pyruvate molecule. This process is done through the removal of hydrogen atoms, which is pretty much oxidation of and it provides enough energy for the entire process to keep on continuing for the next couple of steps. Now, this stage actually has 2 parts. Just like if you started a lawn mower or some sort of a tool in your garage, and you need to prime it, which is to add a little bit of energy to it. Same thing is needed for glycolysis. In order for this process to initiate, it needs 2 ATP molecules, and this is more like the starting step, and this is provided by ATP, and ATP is an ATP triphosphate, which breaks down the phosphate bond and forming ADP, and the phosphate is on the other hand given to a glucose molecule, or one of the intermediates of this process. So phosphorylation is done to an intermediate of the process. Intermediate molecule gets phosphorylized, which means that when ATP is broken down, when ATP breaks down to ADP plus the phosphate, plus the inorganic phosphate, this phosphate molecule phosphorylates another intermediate of the step. And we'll look at most of the steps in the next reaction. You can see the same thing happening over here. Here's your ATP molecules. There are 3 of them. And when the phosphate bond splits, then the phosphate is added to another molecule, which will lead the process forward. So the 2 ATP molecules are your starting molecules. Now, during this process, which is almost there are almost 9 steps to this process, so it's not just a one-step reaction. And all the reactions are given to you in your book on page 135, and I'm talking about the book that is the 9th edition. So if you have a different edition, look in the chapter. In the 9th edition, it's on page 135. I didn't put that slide on here because we are not going to go into each step of the reaction. But if you look in the steps, you will find that the glucose splits into 2 3-carbon compounds, and these 3-carbon compounds they eventually will use 2 ATP to start the process. So this is your starting reaction, and glucose is needed for the start of the reaction. You need 2 molecules of NAD to form NADH, which will accept the hydrogen ion, and at the end of this reaction you'll get 2 pyruvate, 2 NADH, two ADPs from the ATP molecule, and you also get four other ATPs formed, two from each step of the reaction. So if you look on the reaction in the book, you will find the glucose is here, and it divides into two steps. Each step is giving you two ATP molecules. Since there are two of them, so that gives you four ATP molecules. The formation of these ATP molecule is coupled by the reaction where phosphate, it's a removal of the phosphate groups by the 2 ADP and forming the 2 ATPs. For your part on this section, you should know what enters the cycle and what leaves the cycle. So what is the end product, which are all shown over here. You need to know the entire output, and this is are the inputs. At the end of the process, pyruvate is formed, and this pyruvate is going to, this molecule will then leave the cytoplasm and move towards the mitochondria, where some of the other steps of this of the entire respiration process will take place. One thing to note is in both of these slides that I showed you, there was no use of oxygen so far. If we look back on our reaction for glucose, we said glucose is a 6-carbon compound which combines with oxygen to gives you 6 carbon dioxide, 6 water molecules, and energy. So far, we have not found the use of oxygen in this process. We did release a little bit of energy, but not a whole lot. And we haven't seen a formation of carbon dioxide or water. So all of this is implying that glycolysis does not need oxygen. This process will take place in the absence of oxygen. Glycolysis is a more primitive process which was carried out in bacterial cells that were billions of years ago, and it is still carried out in many cells that are not eukaryotic. They just if they do not have oxygen, this would be the end of the breakdown of glucose, and not enough energy is released during this process. However, if oxygen is present, then the next step, which is Krebs cycle followed by electron transport chain, will carry on. So we will now look at the next step in a short while.